Disclaimer: Voldemort's terror wards are no match for J.K. Rowling. "And that is how you gild the lily," Dumbledore finished, displaying a golden flower for all to see. The process was incredibly elegant, a textbook example of how to imbue one substance with the properties of another. It needed precise timing, but it was surprisingly easy. It came in 2 steps. The first made the gold flow like quicksilver over the flower for just a few seconds, and the second infused the gold into its molecular structure, petrifying it, yet leaving its petals as thin and delicate as ever. "For homework, 3 feet describing how the process would differ with silver, copper, aluminum, and platinum," he said. Those were common examples. 4 other metals, 2 common, 2 noble, 2 classical, and 2 modern, a neat survey of the range of elements. "Dismissed," he finished. "Hermione, could you stay for a moment, please?" It was the last week of classes of the term when Hermione got the proverbial call. Professor Dumbledore kept her back after alchemy class and asked her to come up to his office, and he sent Anthony Goldstein to fetch Harry to join them. "I have informed Professor McGonagall that I will not be at dinner tonight," he explained as they walked. "We have more important business to attend to." Hermione waited in silence until Harry arrived. She had no idea what was going on, but she had a feeling she wouldn't get a straight answer until he joined them. He appeared in the headmaster's office soon enough, having apparently nearly run to get there. "Professor, what's going on?" he asked breathlessly. "Harry, Hermione," he said, "last spring I promised you that I would allow you to come with me when it came time to search for a Horcrux." Harry and Hermione both immediately stood at attention. "You found one?" Harry said. "You found a Horcrux?" "I have had my suspicions about this particular location for quite some time," he said. "I now believe that you two are now ready to accompany me." "Come with you?" Harry said eagerly. "Only if you wish it, of course. I did promise you could come, but it would be very wrong of me not to warn you that this will be exceedingly dangerous." "I'm coming," Harry insisted. "And so am I," Hermione agreed. She wasn't going to let her best friend go on his own. And she was definitely going to do her part to stop Voldemort. True, her parents might kill her for running headlong into danger, but she'd worry about that later. "Very well," Dumbledore said with an air of finality. "I will take you with me on one condition, and Hermione, this applies to you, too. I know that you do not answer to me through the Order, but it is vital that we have a clear chain of command on this mission, and I do, in fact, have much more experience than you do. Do you understand?" Hermione gulped. She wasn't sure if she'd ever seen Dumbledore look this serious. "Yes, sir," she said, and Harry echoed her. She wasn't about to argue on this point. "My condition is this, that both of you will obey any command I might give, immediately and without question." "Of course," Harry said at once. Hermione didn't answer instantly, however. Her mind leapt from conclusion to conclusion almost faster than she could follow. She almost turned him down flat for fear of some kind of bait and switch, but her common sense prevailed first. Dumbledore wouldn't ask them to do anything morally egregious, and would assuredly place both of their lives above his own. With Harry being the chosen one, and herself trying to solve the Horcrux problem, that made Dumbledore himself the most expendable of the 3 of them. That wasn't a comforting thought. "You must understand, both of you," he said, whether he took Hermione's silence for assent, she didn't know. "If I tell you to hide, you will hide." Yes, sir." This time both Harry and Hermione spoke at once. "And if I tell you to flee, you will flee." Yes, sir," they repeated. "And if I tell you to leave me and save yourselves?" "I will, sir," Hermione said. Harry whipped his head around to stare at her. "Hermione?" he said in surprise. "Harry," Dumbledore pressed. He turned back to the headmaster and saw the unyielding look in his eyes. "Yes, sir, I will," he assented. "Very good. Then, Harry, there are 2 things you must do. First, Go and fetch your invisibility cloak and return here. Second, look there." He pointed to a glass case standing against the wall. Inside was an ornate sword with a hilt studded with enormous rubies. "I wish for you to take up the sword of Godric Gryffindor, as you did against the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets." Harry's eyes grew to the size of saucers. "Me, sir?" he said. "You were the last person to wield it in battle, Harry," Dumbledore said. "It will submit to you, and you only, until another Gryffindor calls it at a time of need. But you must be very careful with it. When you killed the basilisk, the goblin's silver blade imbibed the serpent's venom. The smallest scratch will be fatal." "You need it to kill the Horcrux," Hermione figured it out. "We're going to destroy the Horcrux and not study it, Professor?" "We are, Hermione," he said firmly. "A Horcrux is too dangerous to leave intact. Our theoretical studies will have to be sufficient to solving our remaining problem." "I understand, sir," she said. "Good. Now, I will ask you to go by a separate route, Hermione, so that we are not seen together. We do not want to rouse suspicion tonight. If there is anything you believe you need to fetch from home, go as swiftly as you are able, and then meet us behind the hogshead in 15 minutes." With a nod, Hermione shakily got up and left the office to walk down to the front gates. There was one thing at home she wanted, but it would also mean having to explain what she was doing to her parents, and she really didn't have the time. She almost decided to pass on it before she remembered the obvious solution. "Dobby!" "Pop!" "Yes, Miss Hermione?" Dobby said. "Dobby, I need you to bring me the buckler I was working on from my bedroom at home. The one that has the straps attached. Don't let Mum and Dad know about it." Dobby nodded and vanished, bringing the buckler back with him a minute later. She might have carried it in her enchanted handbag, but it turned out that widening the opening to accommodate it required an entirely different extension charm that she hadn't got the hang of yet. Her buckler was a simple carbon nanotube disc a foot in diameter and 8 millimeters thick, which strapped onto her left arm, courtesy of Professor Snape's experiments. It weighed about the same as her sword, which was good. It didn't look very nice, and it didn't cover as much as she wanted, but it was already unwieldy for a wand user, so she couldn't make it any bigger. She'd thought about alternative possibilities, like making it folding and spring-loaded, for example, but she hadn't had time to try them out. "Thank you, Dobby," she said. "Now, I want you to tell Mum and Dad I'll be home late, but not to worry because I'll be with Professor Dumbledore." Of course, Dobby was shrewd enough to figure out something was up. "Miss Hermione, what is you doing tonight?" he asked. "That's a secret for now, Dobby. Please just tell Mum and Dad I'll be home late, but not to worry because I'll be with Dumbledore." She repeated her words exactly, so there would be no loopholes. "Yes, Miss Hermione, I will." Dobby's ears were drooping a little, but he obeyed nonetheless. She didn't like using him like this, but again, she didn't have the time, and this was definitely important. With the buckler strapped over the sleeve of her basilisk skin coat, and her sword girded at her side, Hermione's kit was as complete as it would get for the moment. In addition to the buckler, she'd finally got her slash-proof leggings worked out. The insight had come from her mum, who explained that stockings made with even a little bit of lycra in the weave would have more elasticity and stay up better than a pure fiber. So she looked up the chemical formula for lycra, only to find out that it was a fiendishly complicated copolymer of polyester and polyurethane. She could make it, sure, but it would take a lot of effort, and it wouldn't be as good as the factory-made stuff. She considered making nylon instead, or even just plain polyisoprene, which was basically rubber, but Mum came through again and suggested a simpler solution. If she could manipulate fibers so well, why not just buy some lycra clothes and unravel them? She really needed to remember to look out for simple solutions like that. It took a little bit more doing than that, but it wasn't difficult. Hermione bought some lycra clothes and separated out the polymers into microfibers the same size as the carbon nanotube ones she'd been using. Then, after closely examining some ordinary stockings as a guide, she wove them together into a similar ultra-fine fabric as before, only this one was elastic. It worked perfectly. The weave was so fine that it still didn't pass light when stretched, but it had enough give to serve as comfortable clothing. Well, on the third try anyway. Her first pair of leggings wouldn't stay up, and her second pair were so tight that they were cutting off her circulation. Her third try, however, turned out so well that she went back and replaced her vest and bike shorts with the new material. Once fully armed and armored outside the gates, Hermione apparated to Hogsmeade and made a show of walking through town to the Hogshead. She was aware that she looked more like a fantasy adventurer than ever. Only if she were wearing an actual medieval gambeson, she thought, would she look more the part. But unlike the sword, which she would probably never have cause to use, the buckler was a very practical piece of defensive equipment. Harry and Dumbledore met her behind the Hogshead as promised. Dumbledore regarded her new gear with interest, but he didn't comment. Harry looked distinctly impressed. "Whoa, didn't know you were going full knight here."
"Oh, didn't I tell you?"
she said, only to realize she probably hadn't.
Well, I'm just going with whatever works, and Professor Snape says this will."
Harry was looking more knightly than usual himself. He had Gryffindor's sword strapped around his waist and was wearing gloves, just in case.
"We should leave presently, as soon as we are sure of not being seen," Dumbledore interrupted quietly. "Professor, where are we going?" Hermione asked. "Do you know which Horcrux it is?" "I'm afraid I am not certain which it is, although I have my suspicions," Dumbledore replied. "However, as to where, you will remember from the Pensieve memories I showed you, the home of Voldemort's magical family. I have found it."
Hermione remembered. More of a hovel than a home, inhabited by 2 wizards and a witch, dirt poor and hopelessly inbred. She nodded to him.
"Harry, as you do not yet know how to apparate, I will take you by side-along. Hermione, you have not yet done guided apparition before, I believe, but it is not as difficult as side-along. Merely take my arm, and instead of picturing your destination, focus on following where I am going. Get ready, please."
Each of them took one of Dumbledore's arms. Hermione quickly adapted her usual apparition technique on the fly, which wasn't difficult. Focusing on Dumbledore's destination rather than her own, she turned on the spot, feeling the still unpleasant feeling of being squeezed through a tube. No, a straw, she thought. And in a moment she was standing at the edge of a somewhat warmer, though still damp, forest.
"It's unpleasantly like being drunk. What's so unpleasant about being drunk? You ask a glass of water."
Hermione wondered idly if Douglas Adams was a wizard. It was hard to pin down the exact sensation, but this forest felt distinctly unmagical compared with the Forbidden Forest. The trees were smaller here, and the forest floor was much more snarled with thorny undergrowth.
"What do you think?"
Dumbledore asked, as calmly as if he were asking their opinion on a potential campsite.
"It's not exactly national park material, Professor," Hermione said. "No, it is not," he replied. "Abandoned to nature many years, and not in a good way."
"The shack is in there?" Harry asked.
"Indeed, a ways back from the road, in sight of it only when the path to it was well kept. The Gaunts lived completely isolated. They believed themselves to be better than all other wizards, and all other wizards considered themselves better than them, for much more practical reasons. This was not conducive to living in civilized society." Hermione was surprised to hear Dumbledore all but coming out and saying the Gaunts were uncivilized, but the description was apt, and it only seemed to grow more apt as they pushed deeper into the undergrowth. The forest seemed to grow darker, and the vague feeling of magic came back, but twisted in a way that Hermione couldn't properly name. It wasn't the wild, but neutral magic of the Forbidden Forest. It felt more like she imagined the shadow of Mirkwood might have felt. Dark and foreboding. "You feel it too, Hermione? Harry?" Dumbledore asked.
Hermione nodded firmly, and Harry said, "I feel something, sir. I don't like it."
"Nor do I, Harry," he responded. "The Horcrux has had many years to work its malevolence on a forest with no magical defenses against it. You must stay close and be alert, both of you. The Horcrux itself will be very dangerous, like the diary was, and it will doubtless be surrounded by many deadly magical protections."
Dumbledore lit his wand to see by, and they did the same. He then motioned for them to stand just behind him and took small steps forward, his arms outstretched, almost as if he were trying to grasp at the air itself. Hermione and Harry saw nothing, but they could guess he was feeling for something in particular.
The feeling of unease grew as they moved deeper into the forest. Hermione felt that fluttering feeling in her chest that she always got when she was anxious. She began to feel a powerful urge to go anywhere else, to go home to her parents, or to go to her meeting with Septima early. Wait, what meeting?
"Professor, is all this from the Horcrux?" she asked.
No, it is not, Hermione. Voldemort has placed wards on this place to make intruders feel less at ease than they otherwise would be.
"Oh my gosh, Professor, we have to go back," Harry said suddenly. "I have a date with Ginny."
"Harry, is this really the time?" Hermione started.
"No, Harry," Dumbledore spoke over her. "Unless I am very much mistaken, you do not. We are experiencing the effects of a standard repelling ward. Anyone who crosses it suddenly remembers an urgent appointment and feels the urge to leave." "But use your occlumency, Harry, Hermione," he ordered. "Focus on the mission, and tell yourselves that any appointments can be postponed." They did, and the pressure eased. Hermione had it easier because she kept such a tight schedule. Her danger was more in forgetting what day of the week it was than getting her appointments mixed up, but Harry calmed down too.
"Brace yourselves," Dumbledore said, with the barest hint of strain in his voice. "There will, no doubt, be stronger measures."
"Are all the Horcruxes protected like this, sir?" Harry said nervously.
"On the contrary, I am certain that each one will be protected differently. The diary was in the safe keeping of a Death Eater. I have some evidence of another that is protected by more physical deterrents. These protections, however," he stopped and shivered almost imperceptibly, "appear to be emotional in nature." Hermione felt the chill in the air, the growing darkness, and understood what he meant.
"This place feels haunted, Professor," she said. "I mean like Muggles mean when they say haunted."
"Another ward," he confirmed.
"But these, I suspect, are the ones made to repel errant Muggles. Soon I believe we will... Aha!"
He took a large step forward and began trembling. Harry and Hermione began to step forward to help him, but he cut them off.
"Stay where you are for now."
He moved forward on his own, straining as if he were pushing against a great force. It took him what felt like many minutes to move just a short way forward, constantly feeling out for whatever protections were placed. He was trembling the whole way, which worried Hermione, and he several times recoiled as if he'd been struck. But then he pushed all the way through whatever it was, and relaxed.
"All right, it is safe," he called back to them. "It takes a strong, active will to pass through the wards, but the way is clear when you come through."
Hermione swallowed her nervousness and stepped forward, but she only felt more and more anxious as she did so. It was a strange feeling in that, despite the immediate danger, she couldn't really pinpoint what she felt anxious about. She'd had panic attacks before, but they'd always been over something that was worth panicking about. Here it was what she didn't see that weighed on her. Harry grabbed her hand and pulled her along. She was strong-willed, but Harry was a man on a mission when he was truly motivated. Even so, her heart was racing in her chest. Anxiety gave way to abject terror, and she felt a crawling feeling on her skin. It was all she could do to keep from bolting. Dumbledore must have had incredible willpower to push his way forward ahead of them on his own. The crawling feeling intensified with each step, covering every inch of her, over and under her clothes, until it felt like she was moving through a living mass of insects, invisible, inaudible, but as thick as treacle when she tried to press through them, and her every instinct told her to run. It was only the sight of Dumbledore on the other side calling them forward that kept her going. The sensation of crawling bugs started escalating to stinging, mild at first, but still covering every inch of her skin and getting stronger. But pain she could deal with. She gripped Harry's hand tighter and pressed forward once again. Suddenly the stinging changed. No longer was it a mass of insects. Instead it became like a mesh of razor-sharp wires, like the traps she had laid in the Department of Mysteries, threatening to flay her alive if she took another step, and it was then that she cracked.
"Something's wrong!" she cried, trying to pull back. "It's going to kill us!"
"You must continue forward," Dumbledore ordered sternly. "You will not be harmed. It is merely the ward making you feel that way." Hermione couldn't move. She was drenched with sweat and sobbing from pain and fear. It was nearly as bad as if a Dementor was looming over her. She wanted to run far, far away and never come back.
"Come forward," Dumbledore ordered again.
She looked up and saw his face. He was unhurt. He must be right about the wards. Even if she didn't trust him on everything, but she definitely trusted him with the mission. With a supreme effort, she and Harry pushed their way through to him, and suddenly found themselves whole on the other side. The weight of terror vanished. They nearly collapsed from the shock. Dumbledore smiled kindly at them as they caught their breath. After a moment, he said, "I am reminded of the Fountain of Fair Fortune. Do you know it?" Harry shook his head, but Hermione nodded. "We looked it up in the library ages ago, sir. But what about it?" "3 wards," he said. Was that only 3? She thought. I don't understand. Fear, toil, and pain. The 3 wards were fear, toil, and pain. In the story it was emotional pain, but Voldemort would not comprehend that, so he opted for a more physical effect. Only the strongest could come this far. Now I think the protections will be more cunning. Please follow me close behind as before." Dumbledore began to move down the path again, still moving slowly and flicking his wand in small motions as he felt his way forward. Harry and Hermione followed, relieved to be through the terror wards. Now there was only the slight, almost imperceptible tingle of a magical environment around them, but there were sure to be other dangers. They couldn't even see the shack yet, even though it should have been visible by now. There was nothing but brambles and thorn bushes in front of them. Had Voldemort made the whole thing invisible? "Aha!" Dumbledore said, and he waved his hand in a complex pattern and tapped it against something. Suddenly, a wrought iron fence with a large gate appeared, extending right and left in a wide circle around the cluster of bushes in front of them. It was only then that Hermione realized the shack must be hidden within the bushes, like Sleeping Beauty's castle. It was completely dark in the forest by now, and they brightened their wands to see better. The fence was like nothing she had ever seen. It was wrought iron, but she could only just tell that that was what it used to be. Its bars were bent and broken, sticking out everywhere like a forest of spears, and they were rusted. Rusted far more than its age would suggest, until every bent and broken bar was rusted down to a jagged point that would tear flesh at the slightest touch. Dumbledore did not touch the fence, but instead examined it closely. "Surely not," he said. "So crude, and yet very clever in a way Voldemort would surely appreciate." "What is it, Professor?" Harry asked. "A crude ritual, Harry. The gate requires a sacrifice from us to pass." "A sacrifice?" he said. "Yes, a sacrifice of blood, unless I'm very much mistaken." "Blood?" Hermione said softly. "But, Professor, ritual magic requires the price be paid permanently." "It does, Hermione, which is why I said it was very clever in Voldemort's own disturbed way. Anyone who made it through the wards and was not looking very carefully would find themselves impaled upon the invisible fence. They would lose a great deal of blood, and would be severely weakened or even bleeding to death, and beyond the help of a blood replenishing potion. Fortunately, now that we know it is here, only a few drops of blood are needed to open it, and that is a small price to pay for an 1/8 part of Voldemort's soul, don't you think? And only one of us will need to pay it, as well." He withdrew a silver potions knife from his robes. "Professor, I'll do it. Harry started to say, but Dumbledore waved him back. "You are very kind, Harry, but your blood is much more valuable than mine," he said. "Sir, wait!" Hermione jumped in. She quickly drew her black stiletto from her ankle holster and handed it to him. "At least use mine. It's sharper, cleaner, less wasted." The headmaster raised his eyebrows, then nodded in understanding. "Why, thank you, Hermione, and a fine piece of crafting this is." He cut his finger and dripped 3 drops of blood on each half of the rusted gate, wasting nothing. The gap between the halves of the gate glowed, and with a creak and a crunch it began to swing inward. He returned the stiletto and healed his hand while Hermione cleaned the blade. They walked through the gate, being careful not to touch the rusted spikes. It slowly creaked shut behind them. They walked forward and came to a stop an arm's length outside the shell of brambles. Up close, Hermione could finally see the shack inside it, overgrown with vines and thorns. Again, far more than the time since it was last inhabited would suggest. "What do you think?"
Dumbledore asked again. Harry considered the thicket before him for a minute and pointed his wand. Accio Horcrux. Nothing came out, but the thorny vines moved and rattled menacingly, and all three of them took a large step backwards.
A good idea, Harry, but I think we shall have to be a bit cleverer, the headmaster replied.
Can we cut our way through, or burn them? Harry suggested.
With the sword of Gryffindor and Hermione's snickersnack, no doubt we could, but it would be dangerous. No, I think there is a simpler way. Look here, through the thorns. Do you see it?
Harry and Hermione both squinted into the thorns, waving their lighted wands back and forth to see past the shadows. The outline of a door and windows was visible. The door? Harry understood where he was pointing.
Yes, and on the door?
There it was, almost invisible, hidden in plain sight as another vine, unless you knew exactly where to look. A snakeskin!
Correct. The solution, you now see, is very simple. Command the door to open.
Harry caught on at once and stared intently at the snakeskin. Open, 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 he muttered to himself under his breath. And then his voice wasn't English any more, and he let out a low hiss. With a loud rustling and scraping, the thorn bushes peeled aside, exposing the door, which swung inward with a loud creak.
The one good thing to come of Voldemort cursing you with a Horcrux, Harry, Dumbledore said.
He took a step forward, but immediately stopped short and held up his hand for Harry and Hermione to halt.
Ah, and now we see the final trick, he said. This door, I believe, will only allow one person to enter at a time. When one person enters, one person must leave before another does. Otherwise, the thorn bushes will attack. I'm afraid I must go in alone.
There must be something we can do to help, Professor, Harry said.
I think I have an idea, Harry, he said. There is a legend, which is laughably wrong, but may still provide inspiration in this case, that in ancient times the high priest of Israel would enter the Holy of Holies in the temple with a rope tied around his waist, so that if God smote him down, the other priests could drag him out without entering themselves.
He conjured a long rope and tied it just above his belt.
I certainly do not expect to be smitten by anything in that shack, but there are yet many things that could go wrong. If something should happen to me in there, you may pull me out unless I order otherwise.
They took hold of the rope. Hermione was glad to be of some use. Voldemort's protections seemed to be designed to foil any team effort like theirs, but at least there was some point in them coming. However, it was nearly pitch black in the shack, and they couldn't see much of the interior from outside, even by Dumbledore's wand light. They certainly couldn't see enough to help direct him, or even get a good view of him. Hermione had an idea.
"Harry, make your wand brighter if you can," she said.
She extinguished her own lumos and began chanting a spell under her breath, imagining a complex, vaguely cylindrical patch of air just past the door frame, changing its index of refraction. It took a few tries to get the geometry right, but she soon had produced an intangible cylindrical fish-eye lens that allowed them to see the entire interior of the room. It shimmered and rippled as the air moved, and it required a constant application of magic to maintain, but it worked well enough. Dumbledore looked back at the doorway as he noticed the change in lighting. His form narrowed as if in a funhouse mirror by the effect. They must have similarly appeared wider than the doorway to him, but he caught on at once.
"Very clever, Hermione," he said. "Did you invent that spell just now?" "No, Professor," she said. "A new application for an old one. I knew the theory approximately, but this is the first time I've tried it this way." "Well, do continue. This lighting is a definite improvement," he said. He was, they realized after the fact, gravitating towards a particular spot in the room, which would not otherwise have been in sight of the door. He had told them months ago that it was possible to detect a Horcrux by the traces of dark magic around it, but he again moved slowly, passing all the way around the spot and checking for traps. He made occasional comments about what he was doing, but he mostly worked in silence. After a few minutes, he reached his conclusion. "Well, there do not appear to be any traps on the shack itself." He bent down and removed one of the floorboards, lifting it up with his bare hands. He set it aside and cast a few more detection spells before lifting a small box out from underneath it. He looked back up at the pair through the distorted view of the doorway. "The Horcrux is in the box," he said. "It appears Voldemort felt that it did not require any additional protections beyond what is outside the shack." "Which one is it, sir?" Harry asked. "We shall see, Harry." Dumbledore opened the box. "It is the—" His voice caught with a soft gasp. "What is it, Professor?" Hermione said. "It is the ring," he said absently. "I wasn't sure whether to believe it from the memory, but it is," he said, seemingly to himself. It was difficult to see, but he appeared to be kneeling completely still. "Is something wrong, sir?" she said. "No, it is fine," he said, though he seemed oddly unsure of himself. "If I could just try it on once first," so softly they could barely hear it. Then, to their horror, he picked up the ring and started to put it on. "Professor!" "Stop!" "What are you doing?" "Oh!" It was too late. Dumbledore moaned loudly in pain and clutched at his wrist. "The rope, now!" Harry yelled. Dropping her charm and clenching her wand in her teeth, Hermione helped Harry drag Dumbledore out of the shack. The old man was still on his knees, his long robes tearing on the floorboards. Unfortunately, just as he reached the threshold, the bushes came to life and attacked. "Thrash!" "Ah!" Harry yelled as the nearest bush whacked him across the face with a thorny vine. "Thrash!" Hermione was just a fraction further away and barely blocked it with her buckler before grabbing her wand. They tried to pull Dumbledore free, but the wands grabbed him by the wrists and ankles and tried to pull him back into the shack. "Immobilis!" Hermione cried, but the branches slowed for a moment and started up again. "Impedimentia! Diffindo! Relatio!" She was having some effect, but there were too many to stop them all. "Incendio! Reducto! Confrigo!" Harry yelled, but none of his destructive spells did any better. They'd been made highly magic resistance. "Hermione, do something!" "I'm trying! Think! Pushing them around still works, but it's not fast enough. Maybe rearrangement? Voldemort wouldn't expect it, and it's just pushing atoms around." Harry drew the sword of Gryffindor and was starting to make some headway cutting through the branches, but he still wasn't fast enough. Dumbledore was being dragged back inside. "Hermione!" Harry yelled. "Give me a minute. Come on. Got it. Facite aqua lignorum." She threw all of her effort behind the spell, and she could feel it go to work in the vines that gripped her ankles. The first sign was that they began sweating water, and then the nearest coiling branches stiffened, and, to Harry's shock, shattered like glass in a wave traveling back to their roots as she rearranged more and more matter. Soon, only short stems of the nearest branches were impotently waving around while the ground was covered with crumbling wood chips. They pulled Dumbledore away as fast as they could and helped him to his feet, but he staggered, and he thrust out a hand that was fast turning blackened and mummified, a ring that must have been the Horcrux sitting on the middle finger of his wand hand. "Merlin's pants, it's cursed!" Hermione said. Don't touch!" Dumbledore said, his voice strained with pain. "Professor, you have to take it off!" Harry yelled. "Won't come off," he moaned. "It's bonded to his hand," Hermione said. Holding him by the arm, she could see the withered flesh pinching under it. "We have to do something," Harry said. "Take the hand off, maybe?" "No, can't lose a wand hand." "It's getting worse!" Hermione cried. The blackened flesh had already spread to the adjacent fingers. "Professor Snape, he's the only one who can help." "What about destroying the Horcrux?" she said. "Have to wait." He started to stagger back towards the gate, but he stumbled again. His wrists and ankles were bleeding, and Hermione had a bad feeling the curse was making it worse. "But it's killing you! There has to be some way!" She paled as an idea came to her. She pulled out her stiletto again and held it up for him to see. "Lord of the Rings?" she asked, certain he would understand the awful reference. Dumbledore turned and looked her in the eye, and for what might well have been the first time, she saw real fear in his eyes. But he considered just a moment, directing a mere glance at his hand before nodding silently. "Harry, hold him!" she ordered. "What are you—" "Just do it!" She had to do this before she lost her nerve. Harry grabbed Dumbledore's left arm and held him fast while Hermione held his right arm steady, down at an angle so that the ring would fall away from her. It was sitting on the middle joint, in front of a large, cross-shaped ring. I can't believe I'm doing this, she whispered to herself. She wedged the atom-sharp point of her stiletto between the bones and sliced Dumbledore's finger off, ring and all, in one swift motion. She then dropped her stiletto like a hot iron when it started to smoke and turned to ash in her hand. "Harry, destroy it!" she ordered. Harry snapped to attention at once, hefting the sword of Gryffindor over his head and swinging it down on the ring with a mighty crack. There was a bright flash that knocked him back, and all was still. Hermione grabbed her wand again and prepared to heal Dumbledore's hand. It wasn't bleeding. Dumbledore was breathing hard, but slowly coming to his senses. "We must take the ring with us," he said, "to ensure nothing went wrong. It should be safe now, but do not touch it with your hands." Harry didn't have anything useful on hand, but Hermione had a spare pair of gloves in her handbag that she used to pick up and wrap up the ring. They turned around and hurried back to the gate, helping Dumbledore along. They had to move fast. The curse on his hand had slowed, but Hermione had a bad feeling it hadn't stopped. When they reached the gate, closed again, and still filled with jagged, rusty points, Hermione was prepared to cut her finger on Snickerstack to pay the sacrifice, but Harry was ahead of her. He already had blood running down his face from the thorns, so he wiped up some of it with his fingers and flicked it at the gate. It opened outward, and they hobbled through it. "Episky!" Hermione came around and healed the cuts on Harry's face. "Just in case," she said. "Thanks," he replied breathlessly. They pushed back up the path, praying the wards only worked in one direction. "What did you do to the thorns, anyway?" Harry asked. "Rearranged the cellulose chains in the wood into lignin," she said. "Seriously? I thought you couldn't do that to living material." "I can't. The heartwood is already dead, and those bushes were old. They had plenty of it. Ah!" Hermione nearly vomited when the terror wards hit her all at once. It turned out they did go both ways, but it wasn't as much of a problem this time. The wards were designed to drive people out, so they were at least going in the right direction. Plus, she was more worried about Dumbledore right now. They got out quickly. "Professor, are you still okay to apparate?" Hermione asked. "I can probably side along with Harry." Dumbledore held up his wand in a blackened four-fingered hand. He didn't even try to switch it to his left hand, even though it was shaking a little. "It is probably best if you do, Hermione, if you feel comfortable with it. I can make it back on my own, however." Hermione took a deep breath. "All right, then," she said. "Be careful, Professor. Harry, just hold still, will you?" She'd studied the theory of side-along apparition, but she hadn't tried it before. Not wanting to take any more chances than necessary, she grabbed Harry in a bear hug and focused very hard on getting both of them back to the gates of Hogwarts in one piece. They made it back fine, although she gave in to the urge she always had when she apparated to pat herself down and make sure she hadn't lost anything. Dumbledore appeared beside them a few moments later, immediately leaning against the gate for support. It couldn't be easy to use his wand like that, with both the curse and missing a finger marring his hand. "Thank Merlin," Harry said. "Come on, sir, we need to get you to the infirmary." "No, Harry, Severus is the only one who can help with this," he stopped him. "Please loan Hermione your invisibility cloak. Frankly, she is on better terms with him than you are. Hermione, take the cloak and find Severus. Use your map. Tell him to meet us at the clock tower. It isn't ideal, but Harry and I will proceed there under disillusionment. Speak to no one else, not even the elves. You know they are not beholden only to me. Remember, this excursion never happened." "Yes, Professor," she said. She took the cloak, silenced her shoes for good measure, and started running up to the castle.